Hey guys, Michael Marshawn, your Ziegler licensed coach, back with you again. Want to continue the topic that I was on last week, and that is on childhood sexual abuse. In my attempt to bring awareness to this problem, I want to share a little more about my process of healing. Now, if you know my story, you know I grew up in a very legalistic home where there was very much a stigma attached to mental health, and you didn't really go see counselors. You just kind of prayed more and read your Bible, and then everything was okay. That was, in a nutshell, kind of the mentality. It was very much public facing, and they wanted a certain appearance. They wanted you to act and look a certain way in public. So that was basically how I was raised, and how what was ingrained in me is that counseling is bad, and you have to look a certain way. It doesn't really matter what's going on inside. So fast forward to when I started my healing process. Now, as you know, this was about 4.5 years ago when I actually said it out loud for the first time, told anybody. It was about when I was 33 years old. So what that looked like for me was we were at a church that was very much intent on keeping everything in house. And I'm not saying that every church is like this, but I think it's more prevalent than it's not in many cases. And basically, what they wanted to do is they didn't really want outside counselors involved. Now, they weren't saying you can't go to outside counseling in so many words. They just never supported it, and there was no resources if you wanted to go outside. So when I approached them for counseling because I was sexually abused, their immediate response was to connect me with one of the lay counselors. There was actually one or two guys that handled basically all the counseling in the whole church for everything. And by all accounts, very equipped in many areas, but unfortunately, sexual abuse was not one of the areas that they were equipped in. And the result of that, in a nutshell, was that they ended up doing a lot more damage than good, because it started off with asking very deep, very probing questions. Like, one of the first questions I was asked was if I actually got penetrated by this other male. This is in our first session, and that's not something that I was ready to talk about. The answer was yes, unfortunately, because I was raped. But that is not something that any counselor with training would have asked in the first session. So it was a series of questions like that that ended up really setting me back. And before we really even got too far into it, we had transitioned into marriage counseling. So probably 2 or 3 sessions in, and we were dealing with all the basically marriage counseling. It became my wife and I going together, became almost exclusively dealing with marital issues, nothing about the sexual abuse, nothing about the repercussions of that, nothing about anything other than how's it affecting your marriage was essentially all they were concerned with. So that went on for a period of about 4 months till that stopped as well. And then I was just kind of left high and dry. Church didn't give me any other resources. At no point in time did they suggest that I go see an outside counselor that's more equipped for that. There was never a recommendation for that. Even a step further beyond that, I was actually made to feel bad on many cases because I was on an antidepressant that was prescribed by my psychiatrist. So it was never outright said, oh, you shouldn't take that. But there was lots of little things like, oh, well, that's okay for right now. Or, oh, how long do you think you'll be on that? When are you going to be coming off? Um, you know, just things like that. Like, they're not medical professionals, they're, pastors and lay people at a church. So I felt like that was completely overstepping the bounds. And I've talked to a lot of people and done a lot of research, and by and large, most churches, in fact, most counselors, are not equipped to handle childhood sexual abuse. It is a very specific issue, and it requires a lot of very specific training. So in total, I was at 3 different churches with 3 different counselors. Some of them licensed, one of them licensed actually had a doctorate degree, and I got actually worse results with him in a lot of senses than I did with the church counselors that were just lay counselors, because all he wanted to do is just talk about the peripheral stuff too. He would never confront the issue head on of, you were abused, here's what's going on in your brain, here's why you're having these responses, here's your reactions. Here's how we work through the past. It was all, what's going on in your day-to-day life? What's going on at work? How's it affecting your work life? Are you sleeping okay? If not, okay, well, here's some breathing exercises to try to control the anxiety. And this was over a period of about a year. I saw probably 3 times a month I went to this guy, and 99% of the time, all we ever talked about was peripheral stuff, never really dealing with the sexual abuse. So Fast forward again, I'm burnt out by this. I take another break because so now this is three times that I've been to three different counselors at three different churches and basically gotten burned and in a sense got set further back than I was before. So after a period of time, I ended up going back to another counselor, but this time I went completely different. I went with a completely straight secular counselor, had no affiliations with any churches, didn't claim to be a Christian counselor, biblical counselor, anything like that. And she had a doctorate and a PhD, but her thesis was actually in childhood sexual abuse and PTSD. So she was highly qualified in this specific area. And what I found was that working with her for about 5 or 6 months, I made more ground and had more healing and more tools at the end of that time than I had with the probably 2.5 years that I spent with the three different churches at church counseling. So it was very hard work. It was very heavy lifting, but it was actually getting results. And it was in a methodical, systematic way so that in each session built upon the last session, there was homework. You did a lot of the heavy lifting on your own, and then you came in and you processed it. And she gave you the tools, she gave you the resources, she gave you the knowledge and the understanding. So I actually came away from that understanding, okay, when you're abused at 10 years old, like your brain actually stops forming at that time. So a lot of the irrational behavior that I had as a kid past that point made perfect sense now, but nobody else had ever explained that to me. Nobody else seemed to even know that. So things like that were huge for me because it took a ton of the kind of the guilt and shame that I felt for those behaviors and made them gave them a rational purpose. Because if a portion of your brain stops developing at a certain point, then of course you're going to have issues when you have a 10-year-old frontal cortex and you're 16. But the whole point of that was that I'm not dogging on churches. I'm not saying all churches are the same and all churches suck at this, but that has been my experience and much of my research that I've done has kind of backed that up, that churches are very ill equipped to handle that. And many even licensed counselors are ill equipped to handle that. So I would encourage you that if you have sexual abuse or you have trauma in your past, that you find somebody that is specifically trained in that, because that is a very specific issue and not just any counselor can deal with it. And as happened to me, you can actually have setbacks and they will set you further back in the healing process by doing asking the wrong questions or completely avoiding the issue altogether because they're uncomfortable. So I would encourage you guys to get help. If I can be a resource at all, by all means, please reach out to me. My contact information is on the next page. But in any case, don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. Come back next week for more. We got one more episode next Friday, then we'll be taking a couple weeks off for Christmas. But hope you guys are doing well. Stay happy, stay safe. And if I don't see you before then, have a happy Christmas and a great new year.